This section explains the central question that opens. W. Brian Arthur's account of technology. Open the black box. Every prior thinker treated a technology as a sealed object, the steam engine, the dynamo, the laser, and from the outside no mechanism of descent is visible. What you get instead is only Darwinian hand-waving, and it breaks the moment radical novelty appears. You can vary radical novelty appears. This is Arthur's wager, the question the whole book exists to answer. Technology is pre-Darwinian biology, rich in specimens but starved of principle. Look inside, and the principle surfaces. Every technology is a combination of earlier ones, each part itself a technology, all of it seeded by captured natural phenomena. The stock begets the stock. Technology creates itself out of itself. Once a technology becomes a means of production, it becomes a chemistry, elements endlessly recombined. This section explains the single question that the book is built around and why that question had no shape before now. Technology is the human domain we know most exhaustively and understand least. Every electron path in a microprocessor is placed there by us, yet, of its nature, we have no theory. The chapter names that absence directly. What is missing is an ology of technology, a set of principles that binds the particulars, exactly as natural history before Darwin sat on mountains of anatomy with no mechanism. The step that does the work is diagnostic. Stop viewing technologies from the outside as Rosenberg's black boxes. Open them and compare their inside anatomies. Only then do common descent and evolution in the full sense become askable at all. The whole book is that one question. How does technology evolve? This section explains what a technology is at its most basic, by combination and by structure. A technology is a combination of components to a purpose. That single claim is the chapter and the seed of the whole book. Arthur strips 3 definitions down to one operational core. A technology is an executable, fixed by what it does rather than by the materials it is made of. Device and process are one and the same thing, seen from its hardware side or from its software side. Structurally, each technology is a main assembly carrying a base principle, ringed by supporting sub-assemblies. And each sub-assembly is itself a technology, so the structure recurses. Combination plus recursion is why parts cluster into modules rather than scattering loose. Simon makes this point with his 2 watchmakers, Tempus and Hora. It is also why new technologies assemble out of old ones. This part explains how Arthur defines a technology at the structural level. A technology is whatever fulfills a purpose, defined not by what it is, but by what it executes. So Arthur dissolves the dictionary muddle by asking only what a thing does. Once you read it as an executable, the apparent split between device and process vanishes. Both are a sequence of operations. The software, running on physical equipment, the hardware. Emphasize one face and you see a process. Emphasize the other and you see a device. But it is one substrate. And every executable shares a single anatomy, a combination of parts organized around a base principle. A main assembly carrying the function plus sub-assemblies that support it. That combination around a principle is the generative primitive the whole book runs on. The rest is watching it recurse and recombine. This section explains what a technology reduces to at its base. Strip a technology down, and you reach effects rather than parts, natural phenomena, captured and set to work. Arthur's thesis is that a technology is a programming of phenomena to a purpose. It is an orchestration of borrowed natural behaviors, reflection, induction, combustion, schooled into modules that converse like subroutines. The device never creates its core effect. It harnesses one that physics already offers, then arranges supporting effects to keep it usable. The chapter's generative move is the genetic analogy. Phenomena are the genes of technology, a fixed, slowly growing alphabet, reprogrammed into unbounded structures, just as biology programs a gene set into every organism. Grasp this, and the rest of the book's combinatorics follows. Novelty is recombination over a discovered substrate. This section explains Arthur's third principle of technology, the idea that every technology is a captured effect. Every technology is a captured effect, some natural phenomenon harnessed and pointed at a purpose. That is the chapter's whole claim, Arthur's third principle, standing beside combination and recursiveness. A technology that exploited nothing could achieve nothing. So look hard enough, and at the center of any device sits a truism of nature. The examples make this concrete. Oil refining rides differential condensation. The hammer rides momentum transfer. The truck rides combustion plus rolling friction. The dating techniques anchor it, radiocarbon, tree rings, and archaeomagnetism. Each is the same archaeologist reading a different decaying effect backward. The generative move falls straight out. To read any technology, name the phenomenon it captures. To invent one, find an effect that varies with the thing you want. This part explains what a domain is and why moving between domains is the deep engine of technological change. A domain is a language, and a device is a sentence spoken in it. Arthur compresses this in Chapter 4. An individual technology is to a body of technology as a program is to a programming language. Components cluster because they share effects, purpose, or theory, and so they naturally compose. The cluster carries its own grammar, its own practices, its own grammar, its own practices, its own grammar, its own practice. Designing means first domaining, picking which vocabulary to express a purpose in. And the deep move in technological history is redomaining, re-uttering an old purpose in a new tongue, as aircraft control passed from rods and cables to fly-by-wire. This never merely does the job better. A new domain redefines what is sayable at all, the era's reach and its style. This part explains what a domain is, the anchor Arthur uses for the whole chapter. A domain is to an individual technology as a programming language is to a program. That analogy is the generative move of the chapter, so hold it as you go. Stop seeing technology as devices that do jobs. See instead the middle layer, the cluster of components that share a medium, electrons, photons, barges, and combine under a grammar. A domain itself does no job. It is a world you enter. Here is how you use a world. You drop an object down into it, a symphony into electronics, an image into the digital. You manipulate that object by the domain's rules, and you haul it back out transformed. Under this view, design becomes composition, an utterance made within a language. And progress, on this view, is redomaining. You take an old purpose, flight control, transport, calculation, and you re-express it in a new vocabulary of the possible. This part explains why routine engineering produces novelty on its own, without invention. The chapter's claim cuts against the romance of invention. Routine engineering manufactures novelty as a byproduct. The mechanism behind this is a forcing argument. A new design of a known technology is undertaken only when some condition must differ, whether more thrust, a new environment, or a changed market. Otherwise, you take the old one off the shelf. So every new instance necessarily poses a fresh problem. And because assemblies must mutually balance, each level redesigned poses its own. A finished design is therefore a set of solutions to a set of problems, and those solutions are exactly the novel building blocks that evolution recombines. Invention is not the sole source of the new. Constraint applied to the familiar generates it daily. This section explains where novelty in technology quietly comes from and how ordinary engineering builds the parts that later combination reuses. Novelty in technology has a quiet source, not only the dramatic one. Building a new instance of a known technology forces problems. You are not inventing the cable-stayed bridge, you are just constructing the Tatara. But the work still forces problems, because assemblies must balance and early versions glitch. Each fix is a solution, and solutions accumulate as reusable elements. So the everyday engineer doing nothing radical precipitates the building blocks that later combination recombines. Underneath this is a frame. See a technology from inside as fluid combinations whose parts change constantly, rather than as a fixed object. Once you do, it stops offering a few functions and becomes a vocabulary, what we can call the Macintosh toolbox's language of expression. This chapter opens the book's second question, how building blocks arise. This section explains where genuinely new technologies come from. Darwin's gradualism cannot mint a new species of machine. As the chapter puts it, you can add successively as many mail coaches as you please, and you will never get a railway. So Arthur changes the question. The question is no longer how technologies improve. It is how radical novelty, a genuinely new operating principle, first appears. Arthur's answer is a single move. Invention is the linking of a need to an exploitable effect. The principle is the concept that joins the two. This link is recursive. Each principle raises sub-problems, and each sub-problem demands its own sub-solution. The chain terminates only when every link is physically realizable. Nothing is conjured from nothing. At the creative core sits appropriation, principles borrowed, recombined, or recalled. The engine of the new is generation, the active making of combinations, rather than the selection that Darwinian mechanism relies on. This section explains what makes a technology radically new. Invention is not Darwin's accumulation of small favored changes. Schumpeter caught the gap in a single line. Add successively as many mail coaches as you please, you will never get a railway. A radically new technology is one running on a new principle. The principle is a need linked to an exploitable natural effect. The principle is that link itself. Arthur's compression is that this linkage is a recursive chain. The principle's own difficulties become sub-problems, each demanding its own sub-solution, the same mead and effect coupling rerunning one level down. This continues until every branch grounds in parts that are already buildable. Invention is that self-similar coupling, run all the way to the bottom. Within the book, this chapter supplies the generative act. Combination alone, thrown together randomly, never produces it. This part explains why mature technologies grow complex, a principle called structural deepening. Complexity is the residue of pushing a principle against its limits. Press any technology hard enough and some part hits a barrier. The turbine blade softens. The radar echo drowns in its own transmitter. You can swap the part out, but the deeper move is to keep it and hang a subsystem off it that works around the wall, like cooling airflow or a duplexer. That added system is itself a technology, so it gets pushed, hits its own limit, and accretes its own workaround recursively at every level. Arthur calls this structural deepening, and it, not Darwinian variation, explains why Whittle's few hundred-part turbojet becomes a 22,000-part engine. Elaboration is what limitation leaves behind. This part explains why mature technology grows complex rather than staying simple. A technology pressed against the limit has two moves. It can swap the choking part for a better one, or it can keep that part and hang a new subsystem off it to nurse it past the limit. The second move is structural deepening, and it is why maturity means complexity. Consider a jet engine. Its blades soften under heat, so a cooling, airflow system is added. That cooling system has its own limits, so it too gets an assembly. The accretion recurses through every level, performance and elaboration climbing together. Mature technology is the crude original buried under generations of limit patches, each patch breeding its own. Complexity is the fossil record of every barrier the design once hit. This section explains how a new domain of technology meets an economy. A domain meets the economy the way two technologies meet inside one device. The pattern is recombination, not replacement. Arthur's move is to deny the economist's verb. The economy does not adopt a new body of technology. It encounters it. Existing industries select parts of the new domain, fuse them with their own procedures, and birth functions that neither side held alone. The intersection of banking and computation becomes financial risk management. The domain co-adapts in return. This mutual creation is the revolution itself, and redomaining is its name. The primitive carries upward. An economy is itself a body of technology, so it grows by the same combinatorial law as any single tool. Encounter is the engine, not diffusion. This part explains why a domain meets the economy and why that meeting is different from a single technology being taken up. A domain is not adopted, it is encountered. That single inversion is what the chapter is for. Individual technologies get taken up in one direction. Steelmakers adopt the Bessemer process, and productivity shifts. But a whole body of technology, railways, computation, meets the economy as two collections of functionalities that combine. Banking did not adopt computation. Its bookkeeping merged with computation's algorithms to breed digitized accounting, and then financial risk management. Here is the primitive. Encounter is bidirectional combination, so the domain re-architects the economy, and the economy reshapes the domain, co-adapting over decades. That mutual creation is precisely what the word revolution names. Predict the rest from this. Anywhere you see the word adoption, look closer, and you will find a merging. This section explains the chapter's primitive, how technology evolves by building new combinations from its own existing parts. Technology has no separate genealogy. It breeds from its own stock. Every new device is assembled from devices that already exist, and each in turn becomes a building block for the next. The triode alone seeds amplifiers, oscillators, radio, logic gates, and computers across 4 decades. Arthur's name for this is autopoiesis. The collective is self-producing, with humans as its agency rather than its author, much as a coral reef builds from the small lives within it. Two forces drive the build-out. Combination supplies the possible, and it scales as 2 to the power of n, so possibility explodes once it passes a threshold. Opportunity niches, mostly generated by technologies themselves, demand it. The chapter's primitive is this. Evolution here means a network growing its own next nodes. The classical picture of selection over a fixed pool of variants does not apply because the network generates the very variants it then builds upon. This part explains why technology grows itself, out of itself. Technology is autopoietic. It builds itself out of itself. Every novel device is, of necessity, a combination of ones already present. Nothing can be made manifest in the world except from means the world already holds. So, the collective bootstraps. Each new element becomes a possible building block for the next, and the set grows by closing over its own combinations. Arthur's triode anchors this. One vacuum tube element fans out across 4 decades into radio, oscillators, logic gates, computation. 2 forces turn the crank. The first is combination, where the existing stock supplies new possibilities and does so exponentially as the stock itself grows. The second is need, where purposes demand them. History therefore bites. A different order of capture grows a different technology. This section explains W. Brian Arthur's inversion of how we picture an economy. The move is to swap the figure and the ground. The textbook sees an economy as a container, a fixed machine into which technology slot as modules, with everything else rebalancing around them. Arthur turns this inside out. The economy is an expression of its technologies, draped over them the way muscle drapes over a skeleton. Banks, contract law, the stock exchange, these are all purposed systems, and all of them are technology. The payoff is one move. You can now run anywhere. Structure is what novelty continuously secretes, rather than a fixed stage on which novelty merely acts. So a new technology does not trigger a readjustment. It reforms the body it lives in, and that reformed economy then decides which technologies enter next. This is circular causality, and it is visible only over decades. This section explains how Brian Arthur reframes the relationship between technology and the economy. Flip one frame and the whole chapter falls out. Where the textbook makes the economy a container that rebalances when a technology swaps in, Arthur drapes the economy over its technologies, built from them, their expression. Here is the primitive. A system that expresses its substrate inherits the substrate's dynamics. So the combinatorial evolution of technology, read from the economy's side, is itself structural change. A new technology calls forth arrangements that pose fresh problems, and those problems call forth further technologies. The arrangements arrive in sequence. Factories, then labor law, then unions. Circular causality closes the loop. Technology forms the economy, and the economy selects which technologies enter. The contrast that fixes the structure is this. What reforms here is the economy's skeleton itself, fractally over decades. It is not a price readjustment, and it is not a price readjustment. This section gathers the whole argument of the book and turns it on a single surprise. The closing chapter does what a summary alone would not. It collects everything that came before. Technology is combination, combinations harnessing phenomena, an evolution that creates itself out of itself. Then it pivots on one observation. The more sophisticated technology becomes, the more biological it becomes. Self-healing, self-configuring, cognitive, these are biological words, and they are now colonizing machines. Mechanism and metabolism prove to be one object seen from two sides. Seen from the top down, it is clockwork. Seen from the bottom up, it is organism. The chapter's real tellus is to dissolve our ambivalence. What we distrust is our use of nature, and technology itself stands innocent of the charge. Technology is the programming of nature, profoundly natural, and yet it does not feel natural. This section reduces Arthur's whole argument to one primitive. His closing chapter says that technology builds itself out of itself. Every technology is a combination of components that are themselves technologies, each one capturing some phenomenon to a purpose. The novel ones become building blocks for the next, an autocatalytic chemistry rather than a Darwinian descent. Need and solution co-generate. Each technology's limitations seed the problems the next one must solve. The flip the chapter turns on is this: the same recursion, pushed far enough, crosses a boundary. Networks of things executing things, networks that sense, configure, and self-heal, begin wearing biological predicates. Mechanism and organism then become a matter of viewing angle. From the top down, it is clockwork. From the bottom up, it is a functioning body.